Today we will discuss the development of face. Now this development of the face is happening during 4th to 8th week of intrauterine life. Now at the end of 4th week, 5 swellings they appear around the stomatodeum. So what are those? That is frontonasal process, pair of maxillary processes, then pair of mandibular processes. So these are the two processes which are arising from the first arch, that is maxillary process and mandibular process. So these 5 structures around the stomatodeum, they are responsible for the development of the face. Now these processes are formed by the proliferation of the mesoderm and migration of the neural crest cells around the stomatodeum. Now how this development is happening, now we will discuss that after the formation of the head fold, the developing brain and the pericardium, it forms two prominent bulgings separated by stomatodeum. The floor of the stomatodeum is formed by the buccopharyngeal membrane, you can see in the diagram, which separate it from the foregut. Now what happened next to it? The second step is the mesoderm covering the developing forebrain proliferates and forms a downward projection called as frontonasal process. Now this mandibular arch, which is the first arch lying in relation to the cranial most part of the foregut in close relationship to the stomatodeum. Now this mandibular arch is dividing into two processes. One is at the dorsal end and another is lying at the ventral end. Dorsal one is given the name maxillary process and the ventral one is given the name mandibular process. The ectoderm overlying the frontonasal process shows bilateral localized thickenings called as nasal placard, and later on these nasal placard they invaginate to form the nasal pits. Now these nasal pits communicate to stomatodeum. You can see here stomatodeum. Then edges of the nasal pits are raised to form the medial and lateral nasal processes. So these are the things which are happening before the development of the different parts of the face, that is upper lip and lower lip. So these things they appear, that is first mandibular arch is dividing into two processes, then appearance of nasal placard, then formation of medial and lateral nasal processes, then these edges of which are basically related to the nasal pits, that is medial and lateral nasal processes, and in between the two medial nasal processes the frontonasal process is lying. So with this picture now we can understand that formation of upper lip and lower lip, maxillary process grows medially and fuses with the lateral nasal process, and then medial nasal process and it fuses with the frontonasal process. So these are the things which are happening in the formation of the upper lip. Medial and lateral nasal processes also fuse with each other to form the anterior nares. So that is the next step. The maxillary process undergoes considerable growth, and frontonasal process it becomes much narrow as the fusion is happening between the maxillary process, firstly with lateral nasal process, then with medial nasal process, then with the frontonasal process. This is one step. Then second step is that is fusion between medial and lateral nasal processes is also happening. So anterior nares is formed. Now mesodermal basis of the upper lip is, that is lateral part is formed by maxillary process. Now the medial part, that which is called as philtrum, it is formed by frontonasal process. Overlying skin is derived from ectoderm covering the processes. The ectoderm of the maxillary process overages this mesoderm to meet the opposite maxillary process in the midline. So this is the reason why the upper lip is supplied by maxillary nerve. So this is the reason, developmental reason, because overlying skin is just crossing or just covering the frontonasal process to meet with the opposite maxillary process. So this is the diagram showing this. These diagrams are taken from your standard textbooks. Lower lip mandibular process grows towards each other to form the lower lip and lower jaw. The muscles are derived from mesoderm of the second branchial arch, thereby supplied by facial nerve. You can see. So this is the picture showing it. If the this fusion is not complete, suppose between maxillary and mandibular processes, so which is later on going to form the cheeks, so that may lead on to the macrostomia. You can see this large stomatodium. So Now, this development of the cheek after the formation of lips, that is upper and lower, the stomatodium is quite broad. So, if the rest is happening at this level, we call that condition as macrostomia. It is bounded above by the maxillary process and below by the mandibular process. You can see processes progressively fuse with each other to form the cheeks. When maxillary process fuse with the lateral nasal process, the fusion extends from stomatodium to the medial angle of the developing eye, and initially this fusion is marked by a groove which we call it as naso-optic furrow or nasolacrimal sulcus. So this is the naso-optic furrow. You can see later on the heaping of the tissue is happening. A strip of ectoderm becomes buried along the furrow to form the nasolacrimal duct. Now, at this stage, if the excessive fusion between the maxillary and mandibular process is happening, that condition may lead on to the microstomia, small mouth. If the fusion is inadequate, it is not fusing with each other properly, then the condition is macrostomia. So, this is all about the development of the face.